Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place. Ken, we've got some great guests on today.
Yes, we do.
We had a conversation with Abbey and Liam, and this was, for me, I've already had a conversation with Abbey and Liam. I was on their podcast, Evolving Love Project, a while ago, and the conversation was so good. I was so into it. I love their down-to-earth nature, their really practical approach to, hey, we're building this love and this relationship that works for us, and we're interested in talking about that with other people. They just have a really pragmatic but gentle and open perspective. It's so lovely.
It was a very natural conversation with them. We were just talking.
Yeah.
It's really good.
And Abbey and Liam also have they have a beautiful approach to flexibility in like how their openness has developed over the years, and how coming out and being more present and forward facing in the non-monogamous world has played out for them. So really interesting and fun. They're also parents to a young child, so they've got some interesting perspectives on that. And we had a great conversation about motorbikes that I think everybody's just going to want to get in
That was
on.
a good one.
So would you let everybody know exactly where Abbey and Liam are coming from?
Abbey and Liam are the founders of the Evolving Love Project. Together, they create conversations and awareness about the multiplicity of ways people can build conscious relationships. They encourage people to explore alternatives to the status quo on their podcast and at their in-person events in Australia.
Which, you know what? If I'm going to Australia, I'm going to see Abbey and Liam. Okay. Great episode. Can't wait for everybody to dive in.
Hello. Here we are.
Abbey and Liam, thank you so very much for joining us on Playing with Fire. Since I have had the pleasure to talk with you before, I already know this is going to be a fire conversation. But thank you for taking the time and getting up early to come join us.
Really appreciate you putting the time in.
Oh, it's the least we could do. We're excited to have this conversation. We've had it in the calendar for a while, and we've been looking forward to it a lot. And it's great to finally meet you as well, Ken. So it's
great
a great excuse to get up early.
Yeah, we thank you both so much.
Well, let's just start right off. Would you, just describe to us what's going on in your life? The Evolving Love Project is like, it's beautiful. It's amazing. Catch our listeners up with who you are and what's going on for you.
Oh, thank you so much. So the Evolving Love Project, I started when we moved back from New York City at the end of 2019, or maybe it was 2020. And we were coming out to our friends and family slowly as being non-monogamous. And I started this little tiny private Instagram page just for some friends of mine to share about non-monogamous concepts, compersion, just to sort of like own the narrative a little bit, because, as I'm sure you guys know, non-monogamy is high gossip stuff as well. So I was
high gossip. I love that.
Gossip.
Yeah, it's really juicy. So I was like, I'm just gonna share a little bit about this, some of the misconceptions and a little bit more about Liam and I, because we were that monogamous presenting couple, parents, sort of like the perfect monogamous couple. So I started sharing through this Instagram page, and then after a little while I had friends saying, look, this is really interesting, and I actually have a friend and I'd love to share it with her, or this couple that I know, they'd love to read your writing. And so it sort of grew and grew, and it was still a private Instagram page. And then I opened it up, and it evolved into the Evolving Love Project to be more inclusive and to be open to any person who would be interested in this story. And then not long after that, I started writing longer on a Substack, Evolving Love Project, and then started some in-person conversation evenings, which has been really wonderful. So that's just in our hometown in Canberra. Just a beautiful opportunity to bring other people together. Liam and I are not sort of educators in this space, but we are, we do love, holding space for these types of conversations, and just, the opportunity to meet other people and share stories in a non-judgmental environment was really important to us. And then
I think that's so important, creating a space and allowing people to come together. It's so important to be able to be around people who Just like, yeah, listen non-judgmentally and just interact. That's great.
Yeah, and what we found as well is with those conversation nights and having these conversations, we also, as Abby was saying, that we love having these kind of deep conversations about relationships, sexuality, and then so that kind of led into us starting a podcast as well, which is why we had the wonderful Jolie on as well, which is a lot of fun. But so we've had the podcast now for almost 2 years. And recently we've been, as we were talking about before in the pre-roll, we're now releasing every week, but we've had some fantastic guests. We had Chris Ryan on recently, which has been amazing. We had Molly Roden Winter, so we just love jumping in and discussing all things relationships, just like you guys do, and just really traversing some kind of interesting territories.
And I have loved listening to your episodes. I think actually because you approach this from a person first. You have your experience in the non-monogamous experience. Like you're not coming in and saying top down, this is how we have to do things. You are entering in as a peer, as someone who's bumbled through some of it and also like really had some stellar experiences. I mean, your Substack writing is if you're looking to get your engine going, read some of what Abby's been writing. It's amazing to hear your stories and to see how much growth you've experienced over your own journey. And I just appreciate that because a lot of people are not out. They are not sharing their stories. And I understand and respect why, but the more of us who can risk that, the coming out of the non-monogamous closet, as it were, and saying, yeah, this is what I'm doing. This is what my experience is. So I'm curious, how is it going for you each? And this might be different even to be out in the world, to have a public face around this.
I would say that there have been so many stretches of vulnerability with this for us, but everything has sort of happened so slowly. Like it's just been this very gradual coming out process. And, people will say to us now, oh, wow, you guys are so out there. But it doesn't really feel that way for us because it's been sort of these stepping stones. I would say, some of the big things that were very big heartbeat moments were, coming out to family. We had come out to my parents, 6 years ago. So they've known for a long time and are fully supportive and, love us very dearly. And we're sort of, curious, had that initial sort of like, well, I hope that you guys are okay because, we love you and we want you to be together and happy. And so once we moved through that, that was fine. And then, I think it was when we started the podcast, or we were just about to start the podcast, Liam.
That was the moment we came out to my family because I was like, oh, the people are definitely going to find out now.
Somebody's gonna get clued in, and now what?
It's going to get sent around, like our local town of Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, but it's only 500,000 people, so it feels like everyone knows everyone. So as soon as someone gets a hold on, like, oh, they've got a podcast, I know my dad's gonna hear about it. So we came out to my parents, and they were wonderful, and of course they had questions, which were great questions. And sometimes uncomfortable, because at that point we did have our son because we're parents. But we gave them the grace to ask those kind of uncomfortable questions. So all of that kind of trained us. Going back to your question, Jolly, all of that kind of trained us for living in this a little bit more of a space of vulnerability that was really gradual. It wasn't this like, hey, we're non-monogamous, now we're on TV, now we're doing podcasts, all these types of things. It was kind of, for us, it felt really comfortable to just kind of do it very gradually. So where we're at the moment is that we've got a bit more of a profile now, which has been interesting because it's meant that certainly for Abby, I think, it does impact on the dating a little bit. We've had to wrestle.
It does, doesn't it? It
sure
does have an impact on the dating world. Rachel Wright was on our show and said the same thing. There is this like, sometimes people think they know us, even though you have never met them before. And what about you, Liam? Has it impacted your experience?
Look, I'm hoping it does impact in a positive way at some point. I'm waiting for those groupies that Abby seemed to have. But no.
Where are they? Okay,
I'm joking. But no, I think. Well, I mean, maybe I don't really think about it when I'm going into it like a first date. I think often guys, when and Abby can speak to this, but Abby's had situations where guys have been like, I've listened to every single podcast episode, and now we're on a date together, and then Abby goes, oh wow, that asymmetry is a lot to handle. But
Yeah.
I usually date people that we have known previously, or that we kind of develop a connection with. And I date separately, and occasionally Abby and I, when the stars align and our calendars permit, we might go on a date together. But
like with other people.
with other
Yeah.
people, yeah. So yeah, it hasn't really come up as being a problem or a good thing yet.
Mm.
Mhm.
And we also tend to, when we start, when we're seeing someone, we'll stay in touch for a really long time. So we're actually in touch with people who we knew and cared for, from way before we started Evolving Love Project. Even people, that we knew from when we were living in New York City. We were there for 6 years. So we had quite a community of people over there. So yeah.
The reason I think this is such an interesting piece of the puzzle is when people are transitioning from monogamy to non-monogamy, which is often where they come in and like into my world, is there. I think there's this image that being open and being out will look like overwhelming. But I think you're onto something. It's a step-by-step process. And most people either they want the juicy gossip or they're not going to care at all. It's like it's kind of minimal. But so I think people jump to a conclusion that it will feel really shocking. But in fact, my experience was most people just want to know, like, what's the titillating tidbit that, and then
Yeah,
they
sure.
sort of move on to something else. And that you actually get to control the narrative if you come out in your own way. You get to actually participate in making sure that people understand why you're doing this, what your reason was. And that makes me ask, because I don't think I have heard this directly from you. What is your current reason for being non-monogamous? Like, there's the reason why we make the shift originally, but what about right now for each of you? What has you inspired in non-monogamy?
I would say that it's pretty similar to how it was when it first started out. Like for Liam and I, it's always been this incredibly playful, exciting, sort of like erotic thing. We're very compersive. We really sort of enjoy the entire experience of non-monogamy. Like if I'm dating or I connect with somebody, like Liam gets incredibly excited about it. It's sort of like it really has always upped our own experience together, which has always been, a very connected relationship, but it's just like very playful and enjoyable for us. But it is something that we do, think back to at different times, because of course, along the years, there have been times of difficulty. There have been things that we've had to wade through. And as the relationship sort of, has changed from going from more sort of sexual based non-monogamy, then opening up into more polyamorous dynamics at different points, of course, that has had strain, and we've had, we have had our difficulties. But I would say that it does come back to that sense of joy and aliveness for us, and just we're pretty playful, very cheeky people, so it kind of fits.
And I mean, even at the moment, I don't have a partner. I have comment partners who are dotted around the world. But it's a fascinating thing for me because I feel very non-monogamous within myself. And as Abby was saying, with that sense of aliveness, part of the real joy that I find from non-monogamy is just the sense that there are doors that are potentially being able to be walked through if that opportunity arises. For me, it's really incredible to have the sense of possibility that non-monogamy affords me. So even though at the moment I don't have a partner, or, that type of thing, that sense of possibility is just such a beautiful factor in the way in which we construct our relationship.
Well, I
Couldn't agree
identify with
more.
that. I love that. Yeah, that sense of possibility of the open doors um, is key for me. I know. What so when you have this established life, you have your parents. How do you manage the connection that you maintain as parents in the context of the other connections that you're making? How does that all work for you?
Mm. Well, I think for us, we prioritize our son first, always, That's something that we hold very close to our hearts. Is that if anything were to impact, if other relationships were to impact our relationship to him as a parent, then that's when we'd really have to kind of nip it in the bud and kind of pull back and really kind of reconsider how we are doing things. But we feel that being parents and non-monogamous, for us, it actually improves our ability to parent. It makes us happier
Mm.
people. It makes our connection stronger, which he sees. He sees us being happy. He sees us being cheeky. He sees me in the kitchen after Abby's got a hot text from a lover, and me going, "Oh, what did he say?" And then Abby goes, "Oh, he said this." And he sees that aliveness. And he's
Yeah.
only 5, so it's all within the confines of what's age appropriate, of course. And
Hmm.
I know you guys have older children, so there's different things to kind of navigate once you get into that stage. But for us at the moment, it really it feels like a very even balance and approach, and something that we can navigate quite easily. That I think there will be some added difficulty in the future when we do start having the conversations. Like,
Yeah.
what do relationships look like? Are relationships only between a man and a woman? Like, what are the different types of ways to perceive relationships within the world?
Right. I wanna highlight that you're spot on when you say it's developmentally appropriate, and I
Yeah.
think people
Mm,
misunderstand that because a lot of us weren't provided any sexuality or relationship education, certainly in the United States. We're provided almost nothing, and
Mm.
so we may not even have a good sense of what is developmentally appropriate, but if we
Hmm.
step out and take more of a, like, a psychological view on, well,
Mm.
what are children curious about at particular ages, stages? I think about what my own children have shown me they are curious about. It's pretty easy to
Mm.
meet their
mm,
needs for information if I just really allow myself to hear their questions and to, like, let myself enter empathically into their viewpoint,
mm,
and not get too in my head about it, not to actually think about how do I need to structure this conversation, or like
Mm.
exactly what kind of information do they need. Actually, if I empathize with their perspective, yeah, if your son is seeing some adorable playfulness between the two of you and it's been inspired by a text, well, I, that's just so
Mm.
far beyond his imagination. Whereas, yeah, we have adult children. I absolutely may say, like, oh, yeah, I'm in a text thread. It is totally distracting, guys. I'm or we've been playing a Cards Against Humanity game over, a glass of champagne at New Year's Eve, and I'm texting with somebody, and I will just tell them, frankly, what's happening
Mm.
because I am distracted. Yeah, we get to go through those phases and changes with our kids without dogmatically adhering to the monogamous perspective.
mm,
And for me, that's been enlivening. To just be present to the kids as they are. There's something
Mm.
too about Liam, you said it's about the potential, not
Hmm.
about the specific relationships, or not about, hey, we have to have, we each need to have another partner or whatever.
mm.
I think when I think about being a parent, I can't actually plan it all. I have to just be present
Mm.
to
Yes.
what is happening. I
Yeah.
just I just have to let it unfold, and non-monogamy has made it easier for me to practice just being
Mm,
present to what is, to the wander that we're taking through life together and the potential that's there getting eh, without
mm,
getting too many ideas about what I need to have in my life in order to qualify this life as non-monogamous, or in order to make sure that my children are successful. Like, it's really about
mm,
removing
Mm.
preconceptions and
Yeah.
allowing for freedom. It's
Mm.
funny to me, but it all weaves together. It's really about freedom of your mindset in many
Mm.
ways.
Mm.
'Cause all of you have been talking about something that I think comes down to imagination, like the potential of
mm.
this door being open. That's about being able to imagine that there are doors.
Mm.
That
Yes.
there isn't just the one way. And as a parent, it has been um, uh, interesting to me, who didn't get that kind of imagination expansion in my upbringing,
Mm,
to see kids just experiencing it. I have no idea what their lives are like in this way, that
Mm.
because their experience of us doesn't include the blinders and the rigid structures of monogamy. They know about it. Some of them are even like, yeah, I don't know if I would want to date more than one person or have a relationship with more than
Yeah,
one
they're
person.
pretty they're like, "That looks complicated."
Yeah.
But yeah, but it's in their imagination, and
Yeah.
like they can't get it out now. It's there. We've done
Mm.
the parenting thing, and we've put these ideas into their heads, and
Mm.
so that's kind of what I hear you describing is, yep, your son just won't know different
Mm. Mm.
from that. There are other avenues for interest and passion and connection to come into a household. I think
Mm.
that's just amazing.
I do try and slip little things in for him as well. You know, he'll be, if we're talking about, he started recently talking about marriage. I think they might be talking about it at kindergarten, you know, marrying this person and marrying that person. And I've said, oh, well, you
They're
know,
always
that,
getting married on the
yes,
playground.
they're always
It's always
getting married on
happening.
the playground. I say,
They're all
oh,
polyamorous.
and I say, oh, well,
That's
you
right.
know, like, you know, women, you know, there can be like two mummies or two daddies or maybe more sometimes. You know, your auntie, she's with a woman and they might have a baby one day, and he just gets it. You know, he doesn't
Right,
have all these blockages. He's just like, oh
Mm.
Yeah.
yeah, of course. You know, and
right.
recently he's been asking me, Mum, do you love me more or dad more? And
Oh, yeah.
this is a really interesting conversation to be having. And I'm really glad that he's bringing this up, because I'm saying this is an opportunity for me to say, you know, my love for you is so deep and my love for daddy is so deep, but it's different. You know, I have a different type of love with dad and I have a different type of love with you, but you are always, always in my heart.
Mm.
And we can love many people. You know, you love your friends, don't you? And he goes, yeah, I love my friends. And then, you know, he just gets it. It's like, of course, you know, you have more friends, like you can have more love. It's just, it's different. So
Yeah.
I slip
Mm.
it in ways like that,
Mm.
just to, so that he doesn't start, you know, looking at relationships in these boxes
I
without
hear
going
you
into my
moving.
own personal life or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a stance. I'm hearing you taking there's an almost pedagogical stance of, yeah,
Mm.
I'm going to just work from a premise that love is infinite, though as we know in the poly world, calendars are not. Um,
Yes.
and from the stance that we can introduce things without indoctrinating. We can just
Mm,
Yes.
introduce
Yeah.
the possibility. And a lot of times people have made assumptions about Ken and I. There's been assumptions that like we want our kids to be
Hmm.
polyamorous, or we want, and I'm like, I don't want anything for my kids
mm,
other than their happiness. i
mm,
i
Yes. Yeah.
can't I can't want for them. And something about non-monogamy, I feel like it triggers some people in a certain
mm,
way, and then
Mm.
it opens up this Pandora's box of oh, does this, for some reason, do you feel like there would be some pressure to adhere to a particular lifestyle? But I think that comes to an interesting question of, is this for you? Do you feel non-monogamous as an orientation? And if you're not ready to answer this personally, you don't have to, but I love the question of, for you, is it more of an orientation to the world, or is it more of a philosophical commitment, or is it a lifestyle that you're living? Everybody approaches it differently in my experience.
Mm.
mm. Gosh, you know, I do feel like it's all of the above, but I mean, I haven't really experienced being in a sort of non-monogamous relationship outside of this core relationship with Liam, you know, but
Yeah.
looking back to previous relationships, I've always been a free spirit. I've always been a very flirtatious person. I have had other sort of non-monogamous moments at different times in my life, but not in the way that my relationship with Liam has allowed for me to deep dive
Mm.
into it. You know, it's something that we, you know, together we love unpacking, we love diving into the philosophies of it all. So yeah, I'm not sure, but what I do know is that, you know, Liam and I, we, you know, we have been together for over 12 years. We've been non-monogamous for 10 of those years. I do know that we have such a commitment to each other that if, you know, I know there's a lot of, you know, hating on hierarchies and things like that, but if there was something that came up in our in our relationship where we really did need to sort of step back and become more monogamous, I feel really comfortable doing that. If an illness came along, if something happened in our life where we just couldn't manage having other relationships and connections, I think maybe we would become more monogamous in that sense. But maybe we don't. I'm not sure.
Yeah, for me personally, I get it on kind of all of the levels that you said in your question, Jolly. I think on an intellectual level, I really connect with it. It just makes sense to me. I was brought up in a kind of in a I went to a religious based like an Anglican school, but I never really felt this sense of kind of the oppressive religious dogma upon me and the way I viewed relationships. And my parents never really talked about relationships, so I kind of grew up without any framework for what is acceptable, as the proper relationship, which I'm now very thankful for, because I feel like there's not a lot of preconditioned things that I have to work through to really deprogram, which a lot of people that we talk to within our conversation nights or even on the podcast, they've had to do this huge amount of work, like to go, okay, what have I been told by my family, by the church, by society, and then have to reprogram that. I almost feel like a bit of a blank slate. And so I'm kind of
Yeah.
I feel very privileged in the way that I can move through the world. And I'm very comfortable with Abby dating men, and I feel great about it. And I don't really have to do as much programming as deprogramming as other people. I kind of naturally feel like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. Like this is all theoretical. I can read a Jessica Fern book and go, oh, that makes sense to me. I'm not really fighting through this. So either that speaks to just kind of lucky circumstance in the way that
Mhm.
I grew up, or whether that speaks to kind of an innate sense of inherently knowing that non-monogamy is how I'm programmed. I'm not too sure, but I imagine that it's probably a conjunction of all these things.
I really appreciate that, and honestly, I think it resonates with how I have experienced Ken, as
Mm.
he just seems to have this natural openness. There's just, like, an openness to openness. I can't actually imagine knowing a version of you, Ken, who wouldn't agree with what Liam was just saying, like, be in
Well,
alignment with that. I
yeah,
can't.
Liam, what you said about blank slate, that totally resonates. There are of like everybody else, I have, complaints about my experience growing up and things that I wanted to be different, because we all do, I think. But one of the things I complain about is that my parents never really talked to me about anything. On the other hand, they never talked to me about anything. So that benevolent neglect left me with that blank slate that you were talking about. I'm just like, oh, okay. Yeah, so I just get to think whatever I want, because I don't have
Mm.
and
Mm,
yeah, um, my parents brought us to church. It was a Baptist church where, a Northern Baptist versus Southern Baptist, where which is very different
In
in
the
the
US,
United
that's a big
States.
difference, yeah.
Yeah. So it was very open-minded for the time. And there wasn't a lot of, like you said, there weren't a lot of strictures laid down, like this is how you do things. So I didn't have to undo
Mm.
it, which meant I let everybody else just do whatever and I do whatever. And yeah, blank slate. I like that.
So
mm,
I love this because so frequently when I find people have established a certain platform and they're talking about non-monogamy,
Mm.
it's they have had to go through a big
Hmm.
deprogramming. Like often
Mm.
it was as part of a reaction to, oh my gosh, there's just a lot to unpack here, or they've had to like leave their family system, or
mm,
they've had to
Mm.
really gone through some major traumas. And I applaud that. Like doing the work to be your most authentic self, beautiful.
mm,
Mm.
And I think it's also lovely to hear stories of people just saying, yeah, you know what? It's actually been relatively easy for me. I'm like, it
Mm.
sounds like each of you are saying
mm,
you just lean into your nature and
mm,
it supports you, and you didn't have so much conditioning to unpack and dismantle, which leaves you in a place to enjoy the playfulness, enjoy the fun of it.
Hmm.
And for other people, I mean, we Ken is in every single year of opening cohort. He's there and present. He's heard there are a lot of people doing a
Yeah.
lot of
A lot of people have it
deconditioning, and
to,
it is
yeah.
just so much effort. And I applaud it, but I also am glad to hear that there are more people in the world experiencing a sort of blank slate. Hey, I get to
Mm.
actually figure this out for myself. And if I do, what if I just enjoy this? And this is making me
Mm.
think that your perspective on jealousy, like so
Mm.
you've said you're pretty compersive, both of you. How does jealousy work for the two of you these days? Does it come up at all? Or do you feel pretty like free from jealousy at this point?
I would say that jealousy definitely comes up more for me than it does for Liam. I find that the big sort of moments of unpacking jealousy for me have been when they're sort of when we're dating sort of a little bit, less out of it just being more about a sexual connection and more about sort of having a bit more of a relationship, emotional connection, platonic, or like going for beautiful walks together and bonding. Like, over the years, they have been my moments where I'm like, oh, wow, I can really like feel this, coming up for me. And I think for me, I have had times where I react or I get upset in the moment, but then I can sort of it can take me a couple of days and then I sort of sit with it and think about it, process it. The writing helps me so much. I started writing because I needed to write for myself and to understand what was going on for me. So that definitely comes up more for me at different points. And it changes sort of with different people. Like sometimes I don't feel jealousy. I'm not sure why. And other times I do. And I think it can depend on what time of the month it is for me, if I'm premenstrual or if I have other stresses and factors happening in my life. And of course, sometimes if my own non-monogamy isn't going great, I can be a little bit like, well,
Yeah,
good for
then the
you or
envy comes
Yeah.
up
something.
and it's like
And
combining with the jealousy and
yes,
now it ramps things up. Yeah.
Mm.
exactly. Like I can be that person where if Liam's like, I'm going to go to the Botanic Gardens for a beautiful walk, I can be a bit like, well, we haven't been there in ages, like,
Yeah.
that's
Oh.
that
Yeah.
can sort of come up for me. We have those sorts of things.
Well, I think we were talking with Jessica Fern about this on our podcast, and she used the phrase "justice jealousy," which she
Oh
talks about in
yeah.
her book,
Hmm.
and
Oh yeah.
I love
We
that
love that.
because I think that is what really gets Abby going.
Yep.
If there is like, if there is something that I've done with another partner that maybe we don't do enough, or because I'm in this new relationship energy bubble, and things are floating along, and I go, oh yeah, let's do this, super specific thing, and Abby goes, well, we haven't done that in years. That
Yeah.
is, I would say that is the tipping point. But I will say that my jealousy is interesting because the things that might stereotypically make a lot of men jealous, like this idea of like, kind of leftover from patriarchal concepts of like ownership over your wife, over your partner. I don't feel jealous about Abby having like sexual relationships with other men. But recently, I haven't even spoken to Abby about this, so
Oh,
we can work this through in real
Oh,
okay.
time. Here we go.
exciting.
Awesome.
This is a scoop. But recently, Abby it was just like a little pang of jealousy. But Abby was on this date with this awesome guy, and this guy is like just the hottest dude you've ever seen. Like, I'm not joking. Like, he looks like a model, and that doesn't make me jealous at all. Like, I'm so stoked for Abby. Like, I want Abby to be able to hook up and have these experiences with the hottest people possible because she deserves it. She's a legend, and she's a babe.
Yeah.
So all
Why
power
not?
to her.
Go for it.
All power to her. But he, in addition to being a lovely guy and very attractive, he also rides a motorbike. Now, for
Oh.
me, this is a sore spot because, first of all, I would never ride a motorbike because, speaking of upbringings, I was preconditioned. This is my preconditioning, was that I was not. I would never be allowed to ride a motorbike because it's too dangerous. And now I genuinely hold this fear so deeply in my heart that one of the very few things that I completely forbid Abby to do with her non-monogamy is get on another guy's motorbike. Right?
Shocking.
I know.
I love
Yeah.
this. Oh
This
my.
is so
Okay.
There's
this
a
is
huge veto
so
on the
this is
bikes.
a huge veto to the point where I will sometimes, once I've been chatting with, if it ends up me having a conversation with guys that Abby's dating, and usually we all become friends, and I'll bring this up with them, and if they ride motorbikes, and they go, oh yeah, of course, like, I'm more than happy to date Abby and not ride a motorbike with her. But Abby didn't get on the motorbike, but I know that he rocked up to the date on a motorbike, and then even the thought I mean, you can transpose this onto any other form of jealousy that one could feel, but even the thought of Abbey getting on his bike made me feel jealous. And Abbey was in a different city at the time, and I was thinking, I have no control. I have to trust Abbey knows my knows my limits. And as funny an example as it is, it really you can kind of take the elements of the jealousy that I felt and really apply it to so many different things. But I did feel like an embodied, like you would talk about, like an embodied sense of jealousy in that moment. And I had to kind of work through, like the just rationalizing it.
And I wonder if that comes up more for you too, because I love going on motorbikes, and I haven't been on a motorbike in so long because, it would be very distressing for Liam. Like I love adrenaline. Like I love roller coasters. I've never been skydiving, but I think you're not comfortable with me skydiving. Like I can't do anything where I might die.
Let's do that. Yeah.
I can't do anything where I might die. Like I can date men, but I can't.
Just go to more orgies instead.
Go to a hotel takeover.
Hits there.
Go crazy.
Exactly. But it was funny. I did say to him, I said, look, I can't ever go on the bike, because of course he's like, oh, I'll take you for a ride on the bike sometime. I was like,
he's
look,
trying to show off.
He's trying to show off. I'm like, look, I can't go on the bike, but maybe sometime I could come and we could do like an Evolving Love Project photo shoot on the bike, because Liam takes these photos of me as well. And
gorgeous
he loves that idea.
photos.
And I feel like this is a compromise. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I mean, you can be draped over the bike naked, and that's totally fine. But as soon as he puts the keys in the ignition, that's when we got problems.
Now we have to go. Now the limit. So
Nope,
I love this so very much, because there is an element of humor to it. That imagine if someone were struggling with, say, a one penis policy, and they were like, imagine a guy who's just really struggling, and he's trying to do the intellectual work to let go, and he's saying, I don't own my wife. I want to work through this. It's really hard to have a sense of humor about it, right? Like,
Yes.
and yet I see, like, all four of us were just giggling our way through that discussion. If we could bring a sense of levity to, like, I have this internal limit that's really a struggle for me, and I do want to work through it. And the levity, I think, makes space for compromise, yes, collaboration, yes, but also potentially space for you, Liam, to grow over time and to not then look back.
Oh, now you're triggering me, Jolly.
I know.
Watch out.
But here's the thing.
I love where this is going. I love where this is going.
If over
This is the
time
expert.
you experience an ability to grow in this way that makes space for Abbey to take responsibility for her safety in this way, the beautiful thing here would be you could look back and say, look, that was a version of me. That was a version of me who was not taking themselves so seriously, but did have this limit. Did absolutely have this limit. And the difference here is often I see people when they're like, some growth has happened, some change has happened, or maybe you just get to a spot in life where you're like, oh, actually, now our child is older and it doesn't feel as risky or scary or whatever happens. I have a fear of motorcycles too. So I'm actually with you, Liam. But whatever happens, if you could look back at this version of you with compassion and say, like, oh, this was a deep need. He had a wound here. He had something he really needed. If you would look at that with compassion instead of trying to defend that position. Because the place I see people get dug in is, I believed this once, and now I have to keep defending it, and I dig it down, and it becomes part of my identity. So if we're talking about a motorbike, now that's pretty straightforward. You guys get to negotiate about that. But if we were talking about a one penis policy, I would say, well, I'm going to hope for you that you grow and grow through the need to have that as a strict limit. And I would hope that you didn't defend that limit, because that would be so challenging, and it makes it easy for us to stay stuck, right? Because we get identified with this person who can't stretch, who can't change, and who was righteous in that particular limit, in that fear. But I think the levity that you brought to it says that even if it never loosens up, even if you're like, nope, that is a limit for me for life, there is still the potential to treat it with this lightness, and it's not heavy, and it's not weighing down the relationship that you have with Abbey. Whereas often we see this like, ugh, and I can see the resentment like a choke chain on someone, and it's just terrible. And I saw none of that. So I'm very happy
Yeah,
for
well,
it.
I mean, it is really important, and we really value humor within our conversations and difficult conversations, and we can always laugh. I would say almost that example of the bike um, is almost an argument for why non-monogamous conversations are easier. I would find a difficult non-monogamous conversation easier if it didn't, because for me the bike example, as funny as it may be, involves a safety risk,
Right,
and
something you can
removing
quantify
yeah,
too.
and removing all levity for me, it actually is something that statistically I feel like Abby is more at risk, and as a parent, it kind of taps into this mortality question.
Yep.
And for me, I want to protect our ability to be parents, and also selfishly to make sure Abby's around
Yeah.
for myself as a partner. But like the one penis policy is different in a sense, because there isn't that sense, if done consensually and safely, of course, there isn't there's not necessarily a safety risk. And of
Right.
course, so the two examples, whilst they hold similar kind of characteristics, there are some very distinct variables. And I think that the overarching thing of mortality, and it's something that I think, Abby and I've spoken a lot about, going back to your question about kind of drivers for non-monogamy. I think that one of the key drives for me with my non-monogamy is that fear and that acknowledgement of my own mortality. And I think about this a lot. And we had a really interesting conversation with an ABC journalist, Angela Voipier, on our podcast, and she had cancer when she was younger. And I kind of raised that question, like, do you think, this being so close to death has kind of created this almost like hedonistic pursuit within you, that might be driving you forward in these like particular ways? And I think I can really see that within myself. And so when the bike example comes up, and when you were saying like, oh, maybe you'll change, like that to me is the closest that I would come to being like that kind of really reactive person when someone goes, you should not have a one penis policy, and the guy goes, no, this is my rule for the rest of my life. And then I feel like that is me with the bike,
Right.
because I'm like,
Well,
well, maybe when we're 70, like, let's go
Right.
crazy. Let's
right, yeah.
skydive. Let's like climb to the top of like the Empire State Building with our underpants on our head. Like, who cares? Like,
But what I liked about it, and what I liked about what Jolie said, is you keep coming back to the core point of it. The core point of it, which is for you, it's the safety. You're not
mm,
digging into I am someone who is against motorcycles,
mm,
which is something that can happen. And I think that's kind of one of the points she was making is, yep, you could look back later and say, okay, this is how I was feeling. And yeah, there was lightness to it. And um, you have the opportunity to say, I still understand where I came from there. And now I see things different. Whereas if you rode that reactive response that I completely understand, if you rode it and let it be the thing that drove your reactions, then now you are just someone who is against it.
mm,
And there's no point in the future where you could look back without completely changing your identity and say, oh, I thought something different back then. Oh no, you have to be someone else. And so
Yeah.
by
yeah.
keeping it in the focus of, well, this is how I got there,
Yeah.
and
And
not
having that
just this is who I am.
yeah, and I love that, because having that flexibility, like, I'm open to the statistics changing on, the risk of riding a motorbike. If motorbikes were to suddenly become really safe tomorrow, I'd go, great, jump on, like, let's do this.
Right.
But the reality is, like, something like, if someone, when we've had discussions with people about using your example of the one penis policy, once you start to unpack something, there's clearly logical flaws within the argument for that. And
Right.
it's really about us being flexible. Now, I feel really flexible in my I feel totally fine being proven wrong that motorcycles aren't more dangerous than driving a car. So I don't feel like,
Except you won't be.
well,
Except you won't be.
apart from the bit that I won't be.
Setting
Well,
that
you know you
aside.
won't. But here's the thing. I think you are talking about something that let's just draw the parallel a little further.
Mm,
when someone is feeling the desire to put a limit, to put a boundary around their partner's behavior, often it does feel like a safety threat, right? It may not be so you have a statistical safety threat. Now, I have my own. I actually have quite a bit of knowledge about the risks of motorcycles, and they terrify me. And my 19-year-old daughter owns one. It's legitimately terrifying. And you have the stats on your side, which is like kind of cool and relaxing. I feel the relaxation in my own nervous system just recognizing that. But when someone is saying, I don't feel comfortable with my partner having this kind of relationship, or I don't feel comfortable with my partner falling in love, but I'm okay with them having sex, it feels like a statistical safety risk to them. It feels like it. And I think this is I did not know the conversation was going to go here, but I think it's an important point to make, that it feels like a safety risk. And then the question comes with, okay, is there stuff to unpack there? Because Liam, you're right. Like there are safety risks that actually have nothing to do with what Abbey would be doing on this bike, and everything to do with how other people operate in a road system, right? And how the physical structure of this is. So if someone starts to unpack their ideas of what it means to fall in love, of what it means to have sex with another person, we can start to realize that that thing that feels like a legitimate safety risk is actually an attachment safety risk. And those are two different things. It's now, yes, still legitimate, but now it's in the emotional realm versus in the physical realm. And now we have to start asking other questions. And I think that actually brings us to a point where we can say, and you still get to have your limits. I
Yeah.
actually I don't think one penis policies are cool, and I wouldn't condone anyone hanging on to it. But I do think that it often takes a massive deconstruction for some people. And they're going to have to really allow time for that change to happen. And then it's a question of whether you're willing to stick around and do that
Right.
unpacking together.
I do
Yeah.
find in this situation, just sorry to bring it back to the bike, but with the limits and how that's sort of, that's a no-go for me. Where I'm at, I'm actually comfortable with that because I feel like I have so many freedoms in my life. I have like the fact that I was in another city on this date, having an amazing time, in that moment, like I'm okay to, it's fine for me to not get on the bike. And also it kind of also plays into this a little bit of like, it's a bit erotic for me. It's like, I'm sort of on this date with this, like, he's got this bike and I'm not allowed to go on it. Like I'm forbidden. Like it sort of plays into
Little
this
taboo.
bad boy thing. It's a bit taboo. I've got to do the right thing because I'm not allowed to do that. And like that is like really hot for me.
Oh, so
So
maybe
it
we
kind of
need more
works for
limits.
us. So it's
Right.
sort of,
Yeah.
Oh,
it sort of works.
there is an
It sort
argument
of
to be made there.
it
Yep.
sort of works for us because it's like it's a really hard limit that I totally respect and I'm not pushing it. And it also kind of turns me on that there's that limit.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Let's talk
kinda
about power
works.
dynamics then.
Yep.
Like we could do
We only
another whole,
we only have a couple minutes left here,
but
but
Oh,
I
yeah.
no.
love that. No, I
Yes.
really do. I love it because if we think about Jack Moran's theory of the erotic mind and the four major core erotic themes, playing with taboos, playing with forbidden fruits, sometimes our lives are actually just that good that we have to actually create them. We have to create them
We
because,
need an
in
obstacle.
fact, we have immense privilege. Here we are
Mm.
existing at this time when we have so much access. So, and I'm looking at the two of you, gorgeous humans, and thinking, I can imagine why a little bit of constraint could increase your creativity, because there probably aren't a ton of constraints that the two of you experience in your non-monogamy. So that makes total sense to me, Abby, that like it would be a turn on and allows the two of you to also experience what it is to honor each other. Like you don't have to agree with what Liam is asking for to completely agree with his right to make the request, and then your right to decide what to do with that. Because
Yes.
that's deeply freeing to decide to do it rather than just
Absolutely.
adhering as you have to.
Exactly. I'm just pivoting it straight into a kink.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's
And
the
also the communication aspect is that we feel comfortable to bring up anything with each other.
that's
Like
something that I was noticing. Yeah, that you
like
talk about it.
yeah, there's no off limits for something that would make Abby feel uncomfortable. Like I think problems are so often best best kind of discussed out in the open. Like the resentment builds when something is sat on. Like if I'd have just always harbored this like real discomfort, and then suddenly Abbey does it, and then it's kind of, explosion, that is where it becomes a, not a constructive way to kind of really to air these things. But because there's really no conversation that Abbey and I could have that is off limits, which is marvelously freeing, but is also something that, we've worked on within our relationship. Like, certainly when we started seeing each other, it's not like we are where we're at now, where we feel super comfortable in talking about everything. We felt very comfortable immediately talking about our kinks. Like
Yeah.
straight away, I was like, I'm a kinky person. Like this is what I'm into. And Abbey didn't necessarily have the knowledge of some of that stuff and power dynamics and all these kind of things. But we were able, just through just discussions, just to kind of get on the same page or start to explore these, which really opened up our ability to communicate. And then all the kind of standard relationshipy, like living together and, putting the toothbrush away, like all those kind of little squabbly things, became so insignificant. It was like
Mm.
we're having big conversations about sexuality, about what we're interested in, what really turns us on, what doesn't turn us on. Suddenly having a conversation about uh, like these really mundane, like who's going to pick up the shopping or whatever. It's all kind of flowery.
Right. It's so easeful because you're already
Mm.
doing the big things. You've already
Yeah.
Mm.
and right from the beginning.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's never too late. In my experience, never too
Mm.
late to make that transition into we talk about hard things. We talk about
Mm.
everything. We make everything talk aboutable. So I like if you can be an aspirational level of conversation, I hope people
Mm.
hear that.
Yeah.
And speaking of
Mm.
that, since we do have to wrap up, tell people where they can hear more of your story, because I know people are going to be like, okay, I need to know more about these two. Where can they find you?
Well, one place to find us is at the Evolving Love podcast. So we release every week. You can find it on any podcast listening platform. And it's also hosted on our Substack, which is where Abbey does all her incredible writing. She releases writing once a week at evolvingloveproject.substack.com.
Nice.
Yep.
And then we also have conversation evenings as well, which are held in Sydney and Canberra once a month. And Abbey has this incredible women's retreat, which is going to be her second women's retreat. For anyone listening to your podcast in New South Wales or in Australia, Abbey has lots of people flying in from all over Australia for this month,
Mm.
and that's happening in May 2024.
Yep.
I love this so much. And we actually do. Australia is actually our number 2 listening area for whatever reason. We seem to be well loved in
Ah,
Australia.
Yep.
So I would highly recommend everybody follow the Substack, the
Absolutely.
Writing
Yeah.
Abbey. Chef's kiss. It's
Oh.
absolutely delicious. The podcast is lovely. You've had on some of my favorite people. So I hope everybody wanders their way right on over. We'll make sure all of that is in the show notes. Abbey and Liam, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure going wherever the road may
It
take
has been
us.
wonderful. Thank you both.
Oh, thank you both so much for having us.
thanks, guys.
We talk to you all the time. It is absolutely imperative to me that we get to hear from you as well.
Yes, please.
So we'd love to invite you to join us. Join Ken and I. We're holding monthly Ask Me Anythings. You can show up. Bring your questions from podcast episodes, from your relationships. Bring questions about non-monogamy, about individuation, about relationship skills. We would love to share space with you. We're hosting these AMAs free of charge for our podcast listeners. You are the Playing with Fire community, and it matters a ton to us that we connect with you directly. So
Oh,
go,
I would so love to hear your questions and it'd be so awesome.
yeah. Go to joliehamilton.com/AMA and you'll find a way to sign up real quick and get an invitation to join us in a small group where we're going to get together and talk about all things non-monogamy, individuation, and relationships.